Hi, welcome to Drupal 8 DevOps Streamlined and Simplified. I am David Platek. I work at Acqua. I'm the developer advocate there as of recently. My job there is to come out here and talk to people like you so that I can help you guys learn whatever you want to learn about Drupal and to help you get unstuck wherever you might be stuck. In my previous life, I was a technical consultant at Acqua for the last 5 years, working with, as I mentioned, different customers every single week from around the world to help them figure out whatever sort of weird minutia problem they might have that was unique to them, that they thought was unique to them, was really something that so many other people were also running into, which is very common with the Drupal community at large. And before that, I worked in Washington, D.C. for Acqua for a big project that we don't name. And now I get to do what I really wanted to do this entire time, which is actually reach back out to the community and help you guys do all the same stuff we're doing at the same level, or have an open conversation about why we should be changing what we're doing and instead listening to the community to change and adapt to what you guys like to do. So this presentation, Drupal 8 DevOps Streamlined and Simplified, it's really Acqua PS recommended development tools and workflows. This is how we've been doing everything for the entire existence of our organization. If you run into some of our tools, such as BLT, those were tools that we developed as a team that were initially meant for internal uses in order to make the development and deployment of our applications easier and more assured. We wanted to make sure our customers didn't have to worry about breakages and they would always be able to get their code into production. That was a process. Some of you might have heard of BLT back when it was Bolt. Some of you might have used BLT back when we were on version 7 or version 8. I'm here to tell you it is much more useful today than it has ever been. So if you have an opportunity to kickstart a project, I'd recommend using it. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give a demonstration of one of our new tools, the Acqua Developer Studio command line interface, which is going to streamline this entire process even more for you. So watch out for that. Your development workflow should be standardized. Every single project you're on, every single person on your project should have a complete understanding of what the development and deployment workflow is so that they can all use the exact same process. So it's going to be fairly defined as we walk through this. And the value that you get out of this is that it's going to limit the variance between developers and DevOps. Everybody on their local machines should have an environment extremely similar to whatever is going to be pushed into production. It's going to be easier to support because if I know that everybody is using the exact same process, either on a team or even as a community at large, I will be able to troubleshoot those problems in the same way you'll be able to troubleshoot those problems. This kind of goes back to why we're all using a standardized library, Drupal 8, right? It's reusable across your organization. Like I mentioned, I'd strongly recommend using a single workflow, a single pipeline for all of your projects. Learn it, understand it, get really, really good at it. This will give you an opportunity to get into the deeper workings of some things that you might want to do. BLT, for example, will allow you to run all sorts of scripts to build like node projects, compile your SaaS, that sort of thing at specific intervals in your continuous integration containers. So if you begin implementing those things early, you'll be able to have them across your entire organization and all of your customers will enjoy the fruits of that labor. It's going to speed up developer onboarding. One of the things that BLT does out of the box is give you a very handy README for your project that gets you started as a developer. So it might be a little tricky to get BLT up and running as a sprint 0 task, but bringing on any developer after that initial setup is very easy because they just have to follow 5 quick steps that are documented and will generally get them up and running, assuming that some of their technical dependencies are all met. This promotes productivity. It means we can actually do what we want to do, which is develop in Drupal. And it makes for good team morale. Nobody likes struggling with their tools. Everybody just wants Drupal to work. We don't want Composer to break. We don't want our deployments to break. We don't want continuous integration to do something strange that I now have to spend a week trying to debug. I just want to ship code. So by using a single workflow, we're going to get there. So your DevOps workflow should mirror your entire development process. And what do I mean by that? A well-established development workflow and the underlying technologies can and should be carried through all the way from your development process itself, building your application, to your long-term maintenance and deployment. So start early on what your project is going to look like in the lifetime of its entire existence, so that when you get to the point where you're just making regular updates, you don't have to change anything about your process. So this is our standard development workflow. You'll have developers working locally on the left side of the screen, and everybody will ideally have the exact same local development environment. Again, this is because if you have different tools, it's going to be more difficult to support. So pick something and land on it. I'm still using Drupal VM personally. I'm hearing a lot of interest around Lando and DDev and Doxel. And you can still do your own, right? I don't really have an opinion there, except you should probably stop using Dev Desktop. But just pick one thing, make sure everybody on your team understands it, and that way, again, if anything goes wrong, you have your entire team to support you to figure out how to get that unstuck. So in your local environment, everything across your entire team should be the same. And when it comes time for you to start pushing code towards your production environment, when you've completed a ticket, you're going to then push it up to GitHub or whatever service you're going to use, such as GitLab, what's the other one? Bitbucket, and you're going to submit for code review. So when you submit for code review, if you have your continuous integration set up correctly, which that's Travis, it'll automatically kick off a build for you. And if you have a build file that includes things like Composer install, PHP code sniffer, the hat tests, all of those will be run for you before you even have an opportunity to review the code. This means that as a developer, if I see that a colleague of mine has submitted some code and I feel obligated to go review it so I can get it into production, well, if the test hasn't passed yet, I'm going to hold off on that and go do something else and then come back. If the test fails, that's going to let my colleague know that he needs to do something and I don't. But if the test passes, well then I not only can review that piece of code and determine whether or not to put it in, but I also have a greater sense of assurance that everything is actually going to work because it's been deployed and tested in a different environment. We're not going to be talking about testing today as far as unit testing and the hat testing and screenshot testing, but suffice to say you can do all of that within your continuous integration environment in order to have complete validation that everything you're going to be deploying into production is going to work. And then finally, once you've submitted that code, when the pull request is merged, Travis again is going to run a build, and this time it's going to run a special script that's going to deploy everything into your environment. So it's going to push a Git build artifact, what we call it, into whatever Git repo you're using for hosting. In this case, it would be the one hosted on Acqua Cloud. So this again is the development workflow. I, as a local developer, work on my computer. After I'm done, I'm going to push it up to GitHub, to my fork on GitHub, and I'm going to submit a pull request. Continuous integration kicks off automatically. This is Travis CI. We also offer our own version of Travis. I shouldn't say version, but we also offer a task runner similar to Travis. It's called Pipelines. Excited to announce that at the end of the month, Pipelines is going to be free to everybody. So what you would have to do right now to get this automated deployment working is either to pay for Travis, about $80 a month, or to pay for Pipelines. Pipelines has been a product that we've had for a couple of years now. It's great to streamline this process, and we're going to be adding it to the free tier. Oh no, it is a Acqua add-on to your hosting. So if you sign up for a free tier account on Acqua Cloud, which will just have a dev and test environment, we still have those, and Pipelines will be available to that. So as a developer, you'll be able to actually implement and prove that this workflow is functional and that you'll know how to use it before you ever have to give us any money to host a production site. So after Travis does its thing, somebody else needs to actually manually go in and review the code. There's a lot of value here, personally. When I joined Acqua, I was a junior developer. I was working with the best minds in Drupal, off in Washington, DC, and I was given an opportunity to review their code, and I kind of thought that was crazy. Like, why am I looking at your code? Obviously, your code is really good. But what I learned was invaluable. I got to see how better engineers than me solved problems. And I also got to have those conversations with them when they had time. So pair programming is kind of a buzzword. I'm not personally a fan of sitting next to somebody and typing with them. But the code review process is very similar to pair programming in that it gives you an opportunity to have a deep and meaningful conversation with your colleague to either learn something yourself or to impart knowledge to somebody else. So after you review the pull request, you're going to merge it either into the develop branch, or if you're all done with everything, into the master branch. continuous integration is going to do its job, and it's going to go push that code into a separate repository. So you've got GitHub over here as one repository. That's your development repository. And here on our environment, you have our production repository. So we want to keep those two things separate. So the deployment process, I was trying to figure out where this fits in things. So once you get code pushed up into Acqua Cloud, you have a new tag sitting there waiting for you to select and deploy it. Is everybody comfortable with Git tagging? Oh, cool. So we prefer to use tags in our production environments because that way we can very easily roll back. So you take a snapshot of your database before changing the Git tag, switch the tag to whatever you just released today. If it turns out everything breaks, you can very quickly switch back because you can't really deploy to a specific commit. Do you have an experience with that?
No, what I was just going to say is that it would be awesome if through the Acqua Cloud interface, when you are deploying a new tag, if you do an automatically snapshot the database.
It will actually do that, yes. We have cloud hooks and we have cloud APIs. And both of those things can be used. Cloud hooks are super easy to use. We have a bunch of examples of them up on GitHub, and you can add them to your project. Yep. As soon as you deploy code, that'll trigger a hook. You can do whatever you would like, including backing up the databases. But that's Cloud Hooks. Cloud API, we just completely revamped. So the Cloud API has way more going for it, and the ADS CLI that I'm going to be showing off later gives you immediate connections to all of those things. So instead of having to like write curl requests or something to make a request, tell it to back up a database or something, now you can just use a command line tool, which is going to really help you when you're doing continuous integration, because now you can script all of that.
So it sounds like cloud hooks and all that stuff is very, very Acqua oriented.
Kind of. Pantheon has their own version of them too.
Okay, so I'm running DigitalOcean.
Mm-hmm.
Would you use that to call like a drush command to dump the database? I mean,
yes, you could absolutely do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So in your case, if you have your own custom server, you would kind of be responsible for writing whatever hooking is going to do in there, right? So if your server needs to know that you're deploying a Git tag to it, I don't really know from a sysadmin perspective, like how I would inject a shell script there, but that would be the moment where you would then say drush SQL dump and then push everything into a local file there.
Okay.
Trying to think of.
If you use Acqua Cloud, a lot learning about the cloud hooks really.
So I don't at all.
Yeah, it's really beneficial because they've got a number of really useful hooks, and they've got you can do things that run in every environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also hooks that you can run just on dev, just on stage, just on production. And you can use whatever scripting you like. I use bash scripting.
Okay.
Also with deployments, what you could do with DigitalOcean and continuous integration. At the end of this presentation, I'll pull up a YAML file. But you'll see that with each of the continuous integration services you might use, pipelines, Travis, Bamboo, whatever, each of them have different directives for certain steps that are being taken. So for example, if it's a code review, if it's a pull request, instead of a merge, then it's going to run a separate set of scripts than it would otherwise. One of those scripts could very well be a drush command to a remote Drupal site in your DigitalOcean droplet that says, before I actually push this code that I have just built, run this command in this remote environment, back up the database there, and then push the code. I'd be happy to walk you through that. Pull up a YAML file.
Awesome.
So you've got development, you've got code into production. Now you're going to make sure that it's actually ready to be deployed. So with our environments, you have 3 with your subscription: development, staging, and production, unless you have CDEs. So generally speaking, we're going to recommend that in your development environment, you're just going to perpetually have your develop build branch deployed there. So anytime a pull request is accepted, your code is going to get pushed directly into Acquia's Git repo. That code will automatically be deployed onto your development environment. This is where you would then use cloud hooks to make sure that updb is run automatically and you're compiling anything that you need to compile exactly. And then, as a developer, I can see how my code is working with everybody else's code in the live environment. I also have something that I can clone down from regularly. But we recommend that you use the staging environment for your UAT. So developers, we're constantly working, right? Every 2 weeks, we're going to push some new code into stage, but we need a live environment. UAT, on the other hand, I don't know when my customers are actually going to get around to looking at what I just built. So the staging environment sits there for them in order to play around with it as much as they need. When they're done, if they didn't find any bugs, and if they did, that's great. That's what we have a development process for. We can continue to iterate on our development environment while we then fix everything and push it into stage. When it actually does work, you're going to go ahead and schedule a production deployment and then execute it. And that's where you're going to back up that database, you're going to make that Git tag, you're going to run any last tests you need to do, and then launch using whatever best practices you settle on. So what happens if you don't use a development workflow? Chaos. Wild west of code submissions, different people doing it their way, people not necessarily using Drupal coding standards, people forgetting that you're supposed to put a comma at the end of the last item in an array, that kind of stuff. It makes code look bad. You lose many benefits of code history and tracking if we're not doing pull requests, if we're just dumping everything into our repo and just merging everything willy-nilly. Well, where's all the conversation happening? Where do we have any sort of history as to why we made these decisions? I do so much stuff that I can't tell you why I did something 2 years ago. I need to go back to that pull request and read the conversation that I had with one of my colleagues to determine why we did it that way before I then try to fix whatever problem I actually introduced 2 years ago, because I can't reintroduce something over there. So by having a single process that everybody uses, you have that audit trail. You have the ability to sort of gut check yourself and understand more what you intended to do so that anything you do moving forward is less likely to cause breakages. So make sure that your continuous integration is your safety net, because that is there to run all of your builds, confirm that everything is the exact same as it was the last time, all of your tests continue to pass. Make sure that you're not going to make any mistakes. So we have a few assumptions with this particular process, and the good news is that some of these assumptions are in the process of changing. So as it stands right now, obviously you're going to have to use Git. We recommend, again, using two different repositories: your development code base, your social code base, where you're going to collaborate with your colleagues. Put that on a service like GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab. GitLab is probably going to be more popular moving forward since Drupal.org has officially moved to it. And that's where you're going to have that audit trail. That's where you're going to have your pull requests. That's where you're going to maintain that conversation long term. And then you'll have your hosting code base on Acquia's platform or somewhere else. Now, in a situation where you have your own self-hosting DIY solution on DigitalOcean, you might actually just wind up using a single repository. But in this case, as you'll see later, you'll actually have 4 different branches. So your development repository is going to be where you store your develop and your master branches. Your master branch being the thing that you're merging into to eventually become your production site. Your develop branch being the thing that we're working on regularly. But when continuous integration finishes its job, what it actually does is it renames a new branch in a completely separate repo called develop build or master build. So technically, you could keep all of those in the exact same repository and you wouldn't have any issues. The reason we're doing this right now is because we don't have any social coding on acquia.com. So we want you to use this development process. We want you to use the collaboration tools. We don't offer them, so this is our recommendation in the meantime. No comment. So we're also going to assume that all developers have a local environment that mirrors the Acquia hosting environment, really any hosting environment. You want complete parity. And this isn't necessarily just a LAMP stack and just resources. Like, I don't necessarily need the same amount of resources available to my local development environment that I do in my production environment. But if I'm using other tools like, let's say, Solar, I need to make sure that my entire local development environment uses all of that, right? if I'm tightly integrating with things like Memcache and Varnish in order to deliver a faster experience, I need to have all of those things available to me locally so that none of that breaks before I push it up into production. We're also going to assume, of course, that continuous integration will be used for all of your pull requests and during your integration process. And most importantly, you're going to automate as much as possible, except for the actual deployment itself. Things that we're hoping to change: everybody should have a Mac or Linux machine. Realistically, more people are showing up with Windows machines. Even more realistically, we're going to be moving towards like tablets in the future. So we definitely need to revisit this in the very near future. But for now, the best way to develop with Drupal is to just use a Linux-based operating system. I've still run into a lot of issues with it. Yeah, like, so it really depends, right? This goes back to the local development question. Like, if you use Lando, it might be more difficult on Windows. Maybe you choose DDEV. Maybe DDEV works better with Windows, but maybe it only works if like you do the drop in Ubuntu thing, or maybe it only works if you create like a separate virtual machine, right? So there's, it's, you know, ideally we can work across all platforms. Ideally that doesn't matter. Ideally, frankly, we can move all of our development up into the cloud and you can do everything there and we can all use the exact same framework, but TBD. We also want to make sure that you're using an issue and ticket system like Jira. Github also offers kind of an issue ticket system and they don't charge, so you might want to use that instead. All we're really saying here is that every single piece of work that you want to accomplish, every little minute thing like creating a content type, creating a view, styling a slideshow widget or something, should be represented as a single ticket so that we can push that single ticket worth of work through this development process and push it out without having to test out 50 different features that are going out at the same time. We want to try to get all of our minor tests as small as possible. And then if you pay Acqua Professional Services a lot of money, we will do all of this for you. So why Git? It's a version tracking system. It's really easy. It has a process called Git flow, which I'm not sure if I have a slide for, but it's the process of actually working as a collaborative team on a develop branch, submitting these pull requests, eventually merging your develop branch into your master branch and deploying that out. Great stuff to look into. And Git is just widely used. It's what the Drupal community uses. So even though Mercurial is technically better, we're going to go ahead and use Git. Why 2 Git repos? Again, the full artifact for hosting is significantly larger for the required for development. Actually, I didn't talk about that. So the development repo will have all sorts of stuff in it that you do not want in your production environment. For example, my development repo is going to have my Drupal VM recipe. My development repo is going to have all of my tests. My development repo is going to have a bunch of documentation that I probably don't want leaked into the wider environment. My local development repo is going to have additional settings files that are specifically geared towards local development instead of production. And again, I don't want this getting pushed into our production environments. So one of the things that BLT does, that we were talking about earlier, is go through an automated process of building these artifacts and stripping out all the stuff that we don't want in it, as well as putting in extra stuff that we need for Acqua Cloud development. So we're working right now with the BLT project to strip that part out, so this will be something that will become more standardized across the Drupal community. It'll fix some of the composer problems that we have theoretically, since it's fixed the problems for us. But it only works right now if you're using BLT, and BLT does a fantastic job of creating those build artifacts for you. BLT really is monolithic, to your point earlier, but there is so much good stuff in there that, like, if you ever have the opportunity to just dig into where the YAML files are calling those scripts, feel free to just pluck stuff out and use it on your own, because there's a lot of stuff there that we wouldn't want anybody to have to rewrite. So yeah, your development repo, it's going to have all of your stuff in it. It's going to also include the scripts that are going to eventually create your artifact for you. And then Composer itself is being used to actually manage your entire code base. This is an abstracted layer from Composer. We're not going to talk about Composer specifically, but it is the thing that you must use in order to manage your project. Is everybody using Composer to manage their Drupal projects today? Cool, all right. And then the Acqua Git repo, it's for hosting. It's not for managing the code. You will never bring it down to your local environment. You will never deploy the master build branch to your local environment. That is not something that would be valuable to you because there is nothing in there that will help you be a developer. But it is everything that you would want to make sure is pushed into production. All your security considerations are taken care of. Everything is compiled. All of your SaaS is generated into CSS. All of your node applications are put together, and all of your dependencies are in place. Why continuous integration? So all development should be run through a single integration process in order to make sure that everything is met. BLT, in this case, will be run again to validate very many things on your application. We're going to do things like make sure your git commit message follows a standard protocol. We want to make sure that you have your ticket number up front so that when I look at your git log and I dig through that thing, if I see that there was a piece of code that was introduced with a specific ticket, it is now much easier for me to go back to Jira, go back to GitHub, go back to that history, figure out why we did this thing before then trying to patch it. Because again, if you don't understand why what seemed like a bad decision was made, you might make another bad decision. Move on from that slide. So why automation? We want to minimize human error. So back with Drupal 7, many people might have still been using like FTP to push things into their environments. We didn't have things like configuration management. We had features, but features weren't perfect. Features needed to be reverted. A lot of our infrastructure, we didn't have things like cloud APIs and cloud hooks yet. So there was a lot of manual work to be done. I spent a lot of evenings in the middle of the week on the phone with my colleagues to run through deployments and step through all of these little minute tasks to make sure that the application didn't break when we pushed it into production. We had to take the whole thing down for like 5 minutes in the middle of the night and then go through all this stuff to make sure that everything worked. And sometimes there were some feature reverts in there and everything, but it was still manual. These were the early days of Acqua PS. This is before we had BLT. This is where we invented BLT because we really couldn't do that. The application we were working on would really should never come down. So we began to implement automation tools that would make it possible for us to make sure that all of our Drupal applications are compiled and deployed automatically without us ever needing to touch anything, so that all we really needed to do at the end of the day was click that little button that says deploy code. It ensures that all the steps are run in the same place too. So again, your local development environment, your CI environment, your production environment, all the same scripts are going to be run. Some additional scripts might be run in different environments, but at a baseline, you're going to make sure that your code works the same across all of these different environments. Why Mac and Linux and not Windows? Right now, there's a lot of stuff that just simply doesn't necessarily work natively with Windows. I don't have a ton of experience with Windows. I left those days behind me. I remember D6 and D7. It was a nightmare to use it because Windows and PHP didn't play along very well. So in our experiences, every single time we run into any environments that have Windows machines in them, there's going to be a loss of productivity. So if you are in a position where you can just tell your boss, like, can I just get a MacBook? We would strongly urge you to do that. It'll just simplify your life. I'm not here to I don't invest. I'm just trapped in the ecosystem. I don't have the watch or anything, but it does make my life a lot easier just using a Linux kernel. So what are all the components necessary to get this entire workflow going? You've got that code storage and tracking. You've got your continuous integration. You've got your issue tracking. And you've got your local development stack. Issue tracking is going to be the most critical component of all of this in a lot of ways because this is where you as a developer learn what you're actually supposed to do. Depending on the structure of your organization, you might never actually speak with any of your customers. You might speak directly with the project manager who is interpreting everything that they're hearing from the customer and then giving you defined requirements and expectations for your ticket. So it's very important for us to rely on something like a ticketing system so that we can pull a piece of work, fully understand what we're supposed to do without having to go off and have a conversation with somebody, and then get that work done. We will host a Jira instance for you if you give us a lot of money. Or we will work with your Jira instance if you give us a lot of money. Or you can set up your own Jira instance. Other tools, Trello's cool, Pivotal Tracker is out there. Asana is pretty good for this. GitHub doesn't really have the same agile type workflow with their issue system, but you can still make it work. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't built to be a project manager, so yeah. But you can still make it work, right? Like you don't need to introduce highfalutin technologies in order to start using these processes. Right now we're recommending GitHub. This is kind of a little out of date because frankly we're kind of recommending GitLab, but I'm not going to say that too loudly. Again, during development you would have PS host this for you. Post-development, it's your responsibility to maintain this, right? Like we've built the application, we're moving on. The whole point of being able to train you on this workflow is to make sure that once we give you that code base, and I wish Doug Van was in the room, he would appreciate this. Once we give you that code base, everything is fully documented and you understand how to use it. We want to make sure that you don't need to come back to us for maintenance. We want to make sure that if you go bring in another developer firm, if you go work with FFW or MediaCurrent, or if you just bring in somebody who's a freelance contractor, they will very quickly onboard with our tools, get up, be successful, and start contributing to your project. We also recommend continuous integration. As of right now, you should still be using Travis CI. As I mentioned, Travis CI is like $80 a month, which is outside of my price range for just having something for funsies. But it's definitely something that, like, as an organization, you would probably want to invest in. Pipelines, while it will be free, and it is great, just to throw this out there, it's not as powerful as Travis. Travis is going to give you a lot more features. If you want to dive into testing frameworks, if you want to dive into like really standing up an application and maybe load testing against it or something like that, pipelines won't do all of that for you. Pipelines will support the entire build process for you. So in order to actually experience this development repo, production artifact workflow, you can use pipelines for free to see the entire thing deployed. If you don't pay for Travis, you can actually still get a lot of functionality out of it. It just doesn't do the automated deployment for you. That's the thing that they're holding on to get you to give them some money.
If you want to learn Travis and you don't mind having a GitHub repo that is public, it's not private repo, you can use Travis for free.
But they still will not do automated deployments for you. When did they start doing that? When did they start letting you add SSH keys to a free tier account? Okay, I'll have to check that out. I have an example project here. You can actually use multiple continuous integration services at the exact same time. I have an example project on GitHub where I'm using both Travis and pipelines. The reason I'm using pipelines is because that's the automated deployment part. The reason I'm using Travis is because, honestly, it's a better interface. Pipelines was not built to be a fancy interface. Pipelines was just built to create your build artifacts and push them into Acqua Cloud. There are other services, too, I should mention. Circle CI is, I think, actually developed by Drupal developers. There is Atlassian Bamboo. There's also Atlassian pipelines. There's also Jenkins. Of all of those, I'd probably just recommend you stay away from Jenkins. That thing's a monster. Like, lots to learn there. It's really cool. But as a Drupal developer, that's not what I want to be spending my time working on. And then finally, local development with BLT in a local environment. So again, this is what we always do at PS. This is not necessarily something that I'm going to shove down your throats, but I would strongly recommend that you look at it and at least begin to understand what it's doing for you. So learn how it's using its Git commit hooks, the things that make sure that every single time you add code to your Git repository, one, that Git log or that Git commit message matches a certain standard expectation. Also, we're automatically going to run Code Sniffer for you. So anytime you add a new piece of code, Code Sniffer gets run. It's going to tell you if you have any sort of PHP or Drupal 8 coding standard violations. It'll identify them for you. It'll say, go make this one fix over here, and then you'll be able to deploy your code into this environment. There's a way to override that inline if it becomes really onerous for you. So if there's something happening and you just can't get through it, technically you can blow past that stuff. But the idea here is to sort of automate all of these rules that keep you from doing anything that could potentially break your application downline. So right now we're using Drupal VM but that is likely to change because the person who is responsible for Drupal VM is really getting into Docker and Kubernetes. I shouldn't say really doing it. He's been into that stuff for a while. So Docker is definitely where everything seems to be going. Containers is really where everything seems to be going, where a lot of our competitors are going. And there's very clearly an understanding that this is going to be the future. So keep an eye out for big announcements for our cloud infrastructure coming up. And that's it. So I can move into a demonstration of our CLI tools. We can talk about, just generally speaking, what you guys are doing, any issues that you're running into. And heck, I can even just like debug some random Drupal problems if you run into those. So if there are any questions, let's get those out now, and then I'll dive into a CLI demo.
Yeah, I know you can do testing, and inherited projects that have no testing. Whereas I can certainly see in core like PHP unit testing, correct? VHAP is one that when I make an attempt earlier fail. And always for any kind of testing, it's basically get your own kind of library started. Like how do you build like your user object and your roles and all that. Is there like a way to search GitHub or others for VHAP, testing that's public, and others? Because I don't know, because I know for Drupal modules or something, of course, PHP, yes, but I don't know if there are any that are public that have.
So we do have some in BLT. So BLT has some Behat tests. Actually, I don't think it's BLT. It's Lightning that has the Behat tests in it. Because Lightning is a distribution that is going to function exactly the same every single time it is installed on a fresh machine and not customized, right? So the Behat test being like, I, as an anonymous user visit the home page and see this slideshow, right? That works, but only if you know that every single time you build that application, you're going to have that experience. So while I'm sure there's going to be some ways for you to find like examples of people who have written Behat tests for their Drupal applications, their custom applications, they wouldn't necessarily be useful for you because your application is going to be different. But they would be very useful for you to like learn from, right? Check out Lightning. Yeah, we have those Behat tests in there for that reason. Like, well, also so that like we can make sure that it runs correctly every single time, but also like as an example for the wider community.
I see a lot of people misusing that.
What do you see?
Trying to use the hat to test things that really should be tested with functional tests.
Like what?
Trying to test content types.
Yeah, that's not really.
Yeah, log in as the administrator and test a content type to make sure that you've got fields and things on the content type. That really should be a functional test, not a Behat test. Behat's designed to test the user experience.
Which time do I have?
But I was thinking for a project and I think the initial something like a VHAT mimics what the customer wants to see. That's a good way to start. And then of course, I'm not just deprecating each unit. If you're going to do one, I would think I think the VHAT would be first. Get buy-in from the customer because that's what the customer is expecting to see. The content type, all that stuff, that's our concern. But the first test, I'm thinking would be like a VHAT, be the first to, if you got none, if you got no testing.
So just because you mentioned it, and it's worth bringing up, yes, you actually should use Behat to test your content types, but only because this uses Behat to test your content types. What we urge everybody to do early on, in my previous life, one of the things that I would do for customers is visit them on site and either perform a discovery workshop or an architecture workshop. Both of those workshops entail diving into the requirements of the project itself in order to figure out exactly how we're going to meet those requirements with a Drupal application, right? So we would sit down and we would have a conversation about like, well, what content do you want to display? How do you want to display that content? How does this content relate to this other piece of content? If the user touches this piece of content, should that impact this other piece of content over there? And it became this onerous process of documenting all these answers in a way that we would eventually be able to translate that into an actual Drupal build. What we wanted was a way that you could very quickly, as a site builder or as a Drupal developer even, take a set of instructions and go build your entire data architecture very quickly just off of that set of instructions. So that's what we have here, the Drupal spec tool. And it's just a Google Sheet. There we go. And in this example, you'll see we have a list of all of our bundles. So our bundles are the different entity families that we have. We have a list of all of the fields and the bundles that they're going to be attached to. We also have all this extra information about whether or not we're referencing other bundles, whether or not it's required, what the number of values are going to be, all of this stuff. So that by the time that we actually start acting on this project, sprint 1, we can actually just get in there and build the entire data architecture immediately. We've got the fields there, menus, we have all of our views, we have all of our display modes that we're going to need. We have all of our image styles that we're going to need. We have all of our image effects that we're going to need. We even have migrations planned out. This tool is fantastic. And there's also a visual diagram that you'll be able to pull up if you're so inclined. So the idea here being that you'll have a visual representation of all of your bundles, all of your fields, and how they actually interact with one another. This actually came out of a project that involves a trading card game that has characters that exist in multiple universes and media formats and all this other stuff, and they all had to relate to one another in this very complex way. So Travis Carden, who now is running our Orca project to make sure that all of our tools work with all of our other tools, designed this entire system in order to not only do the job of making sure that the discovery process is easier, but also in order to run automated tests in order to confirm that his very complicated data model actually exists. So back to the Git repo here, there are the hat tests built into this that will allow you to run against your spec tool that will inform you how much application you still have left to build. So it will update this field here and let you know what total percentage you are of completion. Mm-hmm. So before you begin building anything, plan. And once you have that plan down, find a way to express that plan to your developer so that they can quickly build it out. This is the tool I would strongly recommend you guys use. This is something similar to describing BLT and how it's an automated framework. I have seen tools like this get reinvented at different web firms, at different customer positions. Same with BLT, right? Everybody's trying to figure out some sort of automated deployment mechanism. They're all using something different. Hopefully we can all sort of agree and start using the same thing. These aren't tools that Acqua wants to own. These are tools that Acqua wants the community to benefit from. So if we can find a way to get your input and feed that input back into these products, I would really like to do that. And since we're really close to running out of time, I do have enough time to do this though, so I'm gonna go ahead and do something that I think is impressive. Watch me, whoops. Well, that's hard to read. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so I have the Acqua Developer Studio installed on my computer. The Acqua Developer Studio offers me a large number of options here, including the ability to create a brand new project, link it to a Acqua Cloud account, and then deploy it all under 5 minutes. So if I run ADS new from my projects directory, I'll go ahead and call this dev tools demo. It's going to ask me, do I want to use BLT or do I not want to use BLT? So the goal here, this is us effectively trying to get those deployment steps out of BLT and into a universal package. Lots of customers aren't using BLT. Some are, but we want to make sure that everybody will be able to use this deployment process regardless of their application technology solution. So you can choose yes or no. I'm going to choose yes. It's going to ask you which installation profile you want to use. Right now, this is still public beta. You can sign up for it at acqua.com/devstudio. Right now, you can do Lightning, Standard, or Minimal. Let's do Lightning. It's going to ask me what environment I want to use. Again, right now, Lando or Drupal VM. This is going to be a BYO application, though, so you'll be able to use any local development environment you want, so long as you already have the recipe prepared for ADS to leverage. So I'm going to go ahead and use Lando in this case. It's going to ask me if I want to link with an existing cloud project. I'm going to go ahead and say no because I can't show you the list of applications that I have access to. And then we're going to go through the process of building out this tool. So let's see, I started this at 10:53. Let's see if we can get it all built in under 3 minutes. It's very possible that we will. And when this is all done, we're going to have a local Lando environment with Lightning installed in it. This tool is going to automatically open up my browser for me, log me in, and I can begin developing Drupal right now. Of course, the internet might be a little bit slow, so that might slow things down a bit. But ignoring the download times, the rest of the process, very, very fast. I guess while we wait for this, and while we only have a couple of minutes, I'd like to ask, what are the difficulties you're having with deployments? Like you're on a DIY stack. I imagine you're responsible for the management of the entire solution, right? So you. All right.
From finding customers to selling them to maintaining them.
So you've got like a lot of projects out there, right?
I started in 2005, so I've got hundreds of websites I've built. And I started off, FTPing and accidentally overwriting database logins and, broken everything there is to break. With Drupal 8, I guess I built my first Drupal 8 site in 2015 or 2016, so that was my introduction to Composer and, kind of doing that, but I'm, trying to establish a more automation in my processes. One thing I don't do is local development. With the hundreds of websites I've built, having VMs on my laptop for that is not a practical solution. So I spin up DigitalOcean boxes, do the dev over SSH, and write that to Git, and everything's done off of my local machine. So it's kind of a different way of, like how many VMs you got on that right now?
Probably 2 right now, because I just created the second one right now. But I spin them up and blow them up. Like the whole reason that we have this BLT onboarding process is that I should be able to have the code on my computer, and whenever I need to spin up the virtual machine, I can, because the virtual machine recipe itself is built into the project. So I can have 100 projects installed on my computer, which means I could install 100 virtual machines at the same time, except I can't. My computer would cry. But whenever I do need to spin one of those up, it's very rapid. The only downside right now is that since I use BLT, oh cool, we're moving right on. BLT uses Drupal VM pretty exclusively, and Drupal VM does admittedly take about 15 minutes to like really spin up an environment and spin up a Drupal site. So that's kind of onerous.
So in any given day, I might have to work on 10 different projects for different customers. And so for me to just open a terminal, SSH in, and run everything, because it's already there.
Are you IDEing remotely too, or do you have like a remote connection through like PHP Storm or something? Or do you use Vim on the server?
I've gotten to where I'm using Vim more on the server just for sake of convenience. PHP Storm does not like working remotely like that, even though they claim it does. You can make it happen, but it doesn't work very well that way. Sublime Text, SSHFS, so I get a local file system that I can work on. But it's pretty.
So We would hope that you would be able to use this to spin up an environment in under 6 minutes in that case. So you would be able to have all those running. Lando, theoretically, is more performant than things like Vagrant and VirtualBox, so you could theoretically have multiple running at the same time. What I'm really starting to get really excited about is remote IDEs. Being able to actually do all of my development in the cloud, basically like open up a web terminal that has an SSH connection to whichever environment I'm currently interested in working in. Seeing that code right there, having all the necessary dev tools I would want in that IDE, Composer pre-installed, Drush pre-installed, Drupal console pre-installed, everything configured to actually support Drupal development. And then an IDE right there in my browser that actually has like all the Drupal coding standards built right in, pretty colors. I don't have to configure a Vim file or anything like that. I've recently gotten a great spiel from a colleague who had to set that up because they were working in an environment that was too secure to install anything. So big banks don't like it when you try to install Vagrant on your corporate machine. So instead, he used a Amazon application. There's also a Microsoft VS Code is the same thing, to stand up a remote server, a Docker container, to then like have purview into the code that he was working on. He just did everything in a web browser. And when he showed me that, I would really like the community to find a way to do this as a group. If we can all like standardize on a single Docker image, if we can all standardize on a single IDE, if we can all standardize on a single process, that is going to make it a lot easier for people to become expert in Drupal 8. It's going to become a lot easier for people who are new to Drupal to really onboard. Because having to learn Composer, having to learn BLT, having to learn Behat, having to learn PHP unit, eventually you need to get there. But if we want a new young generation of people who start using Drupal 8, or older people who are new to Drupal, they're young Drupal developers too. If we want them to come into the fold, we need to make sure that it's easy for them to begin working with Drupal. There's a lot of people that get scared off that.
Well, and for somebody like me that's, basically self-taught, who, is learning as I go, and I don't have a big organization behind me,
Mm-hmm.
All of the tools out right now feel very bulky.
Mm-hmm.
And really my clients are paying me to do their project. So all of this other stuff that I'm doing is kind of, gets in the way.
Yep.
And so, but seamless tools like that would be a cloud-based IDE would be fantastic. That would be great. So then
The best pitch I got for it, I guess for the last talk, so I guess we can just hang out. The best pitch I got for it, I spent a lot of time on airplanes, and I was like, well, how am I supposed to develop on an airplane? And my colleague was like, well, when have you been on an airplane that doesn't have Wi-Fi anymore, right? Like it's 2019, they all have Wi-Fi unless you're on a small regional plane for an hour and a half. So you can technically get online if you need to do work because you're going to build the client for it anyways. And rather than running all of these Composer commands on that slow airplane Wi-Fi, this remote IDE, this remote development environment is connected to like a terabit internet connection in an AWS server somewhere. So that thing is just running as fast as it possibly can, and I'm just looking at a web browser and typing away with like a local JavaScript application. So once I heard that, I don't really see why we wouldn't use remote IDEs. I don't really see why we wouldn't use remote development environments. It would make it very easy, in your case, to quickly spin up a clone of one of those sites and then also have a development environment built right into it. And then you can very quickly blue-green that, and now your development environment is your production environment.
yes, that's basically what I'm doing anyway.
Yeah.
Just
Without the IDE, you're using Vim. Yeah. So
That's the great one. I mean, manage a team and have 30 developers. Friction of getting in and out of projects was just mind numbing. Like you go to load up a project and we get it set up, it takes hours.
Mm-hmm. And we've already done a lot of this. As a Drupal developer for many years, you've probably been through the process of explaining to people that you need to put all of your modules and themes in the right place. that you need to manage your sites file correctly, that your private files need to go into the right place, that you need to either put stuff in a doc root or a web root. Like there's just little isms there that you learn that you need to do in order to have like the best practice to do things the way that everybody else is doing. But a lot of people are self-taught. I think everybody in Drupal is self-taught. And they don't know that there are certain things that they're supposed to be doing. People don't know that there are Drupal coding standards. People know that there are PHP coding standards, but there are a lot of people that don't know that there's an extra layer of coding standards. So we can't really expect them to be doing all of this if we're not doing something to make sure that this is an enforced process and it's an informed process. If I want you to do good code, if I want you to follow our coding standards, I should provide you with tools that enforces those coding standards and explains them to you. Because if I don't, then what am I really expecting out of you, right? Like it should be our responsibility as senior people in our community to reach out and help everybody who is struggling. So
I think being standardized on something like Lambda, because I've been using ever since I found it the Drupal Composer template, and that has it's amazing what that has done, right? Because the first site I'd never even used Composer. I'm trying to move a site in there, how many times I configured things wrong, figuring out okay, this is how I need to set up my directory structure. Now I just install this thing and hit run, and boom, I've got a working install. We could go standardize on that, standardize on Orlando, where, okay, this is how you run a Drupal project. All your tools are in this box, and all you got to do is hit run, and you can start coding. That
Absolutely.
would be, instead of, okay, what kind of database am I running? What kind of, all the pieces are in the box, and then it's easy to tell people how to run the box. But yeah, right now it's like, well, you're doing this right.
Not this right.
Oh, you didn't do that? Oh, okay. Well, first you need to go back and relearn all the things that you didn't do right before you can get going on, thing you're trying to do.
Yep. And if we could just give them that box, right? It could be a transparent box that is a little bit opaque. It just works, right? They can just get in there. They can do a little bit of theming. And as they want to start exploring some of those deeper parts of Drupal, that's still there for them. But I don't need you to understand Composer day one. I need you to be able to install Drupal on a server somewhere and begin creating content types and begin creating content. That's step one to learning Drupal. We shouldn't be expecting people to dive all the way into being PHP developers in order to do Drupal. That's how we run into services like Contentful that create content models for us that don't allow us to build full stack applications. I want people who are using Contentful right now for their headless applications to instead see Drupal as an accessible option to them that gives them the freedom to do whatever they want to do, as opposed to Contentful, which is pretty limited, as well as a free tool. Let's not charge people for anything, right? DigitalOcean containers are still like $5 a month. So if I'm a headless Drupal, or if I'm a Vue.js developer and I want to use Drupal instead of Contentful, because Contentful is $30 a month and DigitalOcean is $5 a month, if it's really easy for me as a non-Drupal developer to just spin up a Drupal environment and go in there and create a couple of content types, I'm probably going to use Drupal. And then eventually, somewhere else down the line, I'm probably going to advocate to use Drupal for something else, because Drupal's a really good tool once you start using it. It's kind of got a bad rap in some places, but that's going to happen. But a lot of that bad rap is because it's a very complicated tool. It was built to solve problems, insurmountable problems and innumerable problems. We have tools that work for higher ed and for nonprofit and for Fortune 500 and for personal blogs. Like, you can do anything with Drupal. And the net result of that is that, yes, you get a very complicated product. So the next thing that I believe that we need to do is begin finding a way not to necessarily simplify the product, but to abstract the complexity and then make it possible for people to get deeper into that expert level. And I'm really excited to have my job and get to do that now.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. This is, of course, I'm looking at this through my lens, and big teams with 30, 40, 50, 100 developers have different needs than I do, and
but you also have very similar needs because you have like hundreds of projects, right? And so having that consistency across all of those projects, being able to depend on all that automation, it's just as valuable. It's probably more valuable to you than it is a large team of people, right?
emergency patches come out, and I'm, oh shit, I gotta test it on this one. That one hadn't been updated in 2 years because the client doesn't pay for maintenance, but when, that's a very complicated thing, right? And oh, holy shit, this 0-day vulnerability better get patched by Tuesday, or, because that Drupal getting 2 thing, I mean, I didn't sleep for a week trying to update all those websites.
And I'm sure, like, if you've been doing this since 2005, I'm sure you have some sites that are still D7, maybe even still D6. And so everybody's using like a slightly different process, right? So you have to remember, you have to document, or you have to remember every single one of these things. And every time you open up a new project and you have to read through all this documentation to remember how you're supposed to do all this stuff, you're losing time, right? You're losing time, you're losing money, you're losing sleep. So moving forward, I don't think that there's anything we can do for the D6 and D7 projects out there, but moving forward, we can definitely solve this problem. And since the future of Drupal is just going to be effectively like minor version updates forever, we can solve this problem now. Like, yeah.
If they're able to keep that mentality from 9 to 10, that's going to be huge, because, I mean, really, nothing has been consistent, not just Drupal, but any industry. Nothing has been that kind of stable, in the 15 years I've been doing this.
Well, one of the things I've gotten the opportunity to learn, having worked with so many customers, is that all software is kind of broken. Like, it's, we're good like with the software that we learn, which is why, like, some people get like, they have negative opinions of the stuff that they haven't used because they tried to learn it, it was difficult. It was more difficult than what they're already using, so they just went back with what they were using, right? Like, I am not going to tell you PHP is great, but I'm also not going to tell you that Java is bad, right? Like, Java obviously has its purpose. It's just not my tool. I haven't learned it. If I learned it, I'm sure I would like it. But PHP is perfectly fine. So we definitely need to do a better job of communicating the fact that the things that people are experiencing, the struggles that they're having, the problems with Composer that they're running into, the problems with just like Blando stacks, VM stacks, all that. This is common. We're all having these problems. You're not alone. You shouldn't be struggling by yourself, banging your head on the desk. Like, there's a community of people who are also struggling with these things, and we need to find a way as thought leaders to actually solve those problems for people. I really believe that a large part of that is to actually communicate with you and say, like, what are you doing and what would you like to do differently? And then how could a large organization like Acqua possibly help you with that by building tools that hopefully lead you to our platform. I would love it if you would pay for our hosting. I would love it if you would come onto our platform. I would love it if you would give us feedback and help us build a better product. I truly believe that we have a great product. We have great support. We have a fantastic team. We're constantly rolling out new great tools that are building onto our existing tooling and integrate tightly with Drupal. We just bought Cohesion, which is a huge thing. Modic is available now. So I believe that if you really get into Drupal and you really get into developer tools, you just naturally lead towards Acqua. So if I can do everything I can do to just help you with every other capacity, then my company benefits.